Well, that didn't last long now, did it? Looks like Lando Norris is off the hook, for now. But it might be only a matter of time before we get yet more repercussions. But this time around, it's Oscar who's borne the brunt of it. And hey, it would be unfair if I didn't talk about it. So we all remember the bombshell announcement which came after the Singapore Grand Prix, right? Yeah, how could we forget? Norris said that he faced internal consequences until the end of the season. He looked sheepish. Piastri quietly satisfied, as summed up by Sky Sports F1 thumbnail on the matter. A week later, it's been completely reversed. The repercussions, they no longer exist. But McLaren's quick fix might have opened up a brand new problem instead, one that I do not think they can fix unless things go totally dark between both drivers, or Max Verstappen becomes too big of a threat. And it's also another example of McLaren getting itself involved with its drivers even though it's promising not to get involved with its drivers. You know, sort of an eye for an eye and all of that. Lando does something, Oscar gets a perk. If Oscar does something, Lando gets a perk. Ideally, it would like to be all a set and forget sort of thing, but it now makes us think, oh, what will happen? You know, but boring HR style politics wrapped in McLaren's shade of orange and black. And Piastri, he's been a good boy in that regard, because every single thing that McLaren signals at the moment is a message to sponsors and investors. Because with them towing the party line, both Oscar and Lando, and McLaren playing happy family, it's very much signalling to all of the people who have backed this team and absolutely skyrocketed the team's valuation to now being like $3-4 billion, which is a far cry from where they were, near bankruptcy in 2020. It's now a sense of all is well. Internal harmony has been restored. The team looks stable. They are not concerned, and therefore the investors should not be concerned. Because it does appear that McLaren has walked back the supposed advantage that Piastri had acquired after what happened around Marina Bay. And as I talked about in my video last week, I was supposing it was something not exactly sexy, it was something procedural, not fine or anything like that. And sure enough, many pundits and very hard-working fans have deduced that it might have been something to do with who gets to go first in qualifying sessions, that being Oscar, or at least he gets to choose. That edge now seems to be gone. Nobody has a preference, it's now down to the strategists to decide who goes first. And we heard all of this during yesterday's FIA press conference before the Mexican Grand Prix from Oscar himself. So here are Oscar's words for your consideration, and we will compare and contrast those to what Lando said to the media last week. So here it is. Ahem. We've gone through it again, said Oscar. We go through every weekend, regardless of what's happened. I think there is a degree of responsibility from my side in the sprint, and we're starting this weekend with a clean slate for both of us, so just going out and racing and see who can come out on top. There are a lot of factors involved, but ultimately that's what's been decided. For us, it's pretty clear what those rules are, which is don't crash into each other. But I think regardless of what scenario you're in, that's how you're expected to race as teammates, so I don't think that adds any pressure into the scenario. Now, I can imagine that Oscar's management, after what happened around Austin, and then realised what he said after the situation in Singapore, and now thinking, wow, not only did Oscar's comments age like milk, they aged like raw chicken. Oh, the Piastri naysayers were having a field day with that one! Anyway, let's take those words and stack them up against Lando's. Norris before Austin leaned into accountability. Emotional, direct, maybe even a little bit defensive. Whereas Piastri's tone right here, it's cooler and more standard, focused on rules and that clean slate chestnut, like how Lando was regarding accountability. They're both saying the right things, but in their own styles so as to make it look organic. Like, you read it and go, yeah, that's something Lando would say, or that's something Oscar would say. Both men are saying that the core of papaya rules should be abided by, as in don't crash to your teammate, and therefore everything that goes from now on is straightforward, it's just that one rule. Don't crash into your teammate. There are not going to be any more technicalities or movings of goalposts, ideally. But there is still a notable difference here, because last week with Lando Norris very much acting defensive and being very like, yeah, there's going to be repercussions towards me toward the end of the season, he looked somewhat defeated. Whereas with Piastri, it seemed like, oh, fair dinkum, mate. Oh well, we'll just carry on and move on. And then probably ended with a, so, yeah. He's also accepting a degree of responsibility for the particular incident. And I also feel like McLaren have had to do a little bit of damage control themselves, because you got to admit, after that incident, Zach Brown was doing a whole lot of overcorrecting and very much backing Piastri, saying, yeah, Nico, how dare you? You talk about, what is this, amateur hour? Ah! I was going like, whoa, Brown, calm down, mate. Piastri! Because Nico was then just saying, I'm just sandwich filling between Alonso and Piastri. And then sure enough, what happens afterwards, Zak Brown took Nico aside and apologised for jumping the gun. But I do think that the optical damage was done because Zak Brown's initial reaction was heard on Sky Sports to tens of millions of people across the world, whereas the reporting of him taking Hülkenberg aside and apologising man-to-man, face-to-face, that was probably something that you would have seen in the F1 periodicals, not really talked about as much on the media. But yeah, that is a pretty big climb down if ever I saw one, and was very much telling me that the word at that particular moment was to back Oscar to the hilt. That to me looked like that McLaren were overcompensating and really just overreacted to that particular situation. But back to Lando and Oscar. The two incidents have really set them apart in terms of conduct in a manner which is impossible to ignore, because they relate to the same type of circumstance. They made contact with their teammate, unintentional or otherwise. From Piastri's side, his words were tidy corporate communications, whilst also not passing the buck. He's not dwelling on it, he owns it, he's accepting that they followed standard process, and that the team has meetings all the time, that this isn't a big deal, he wants to de-escalate. Much like how I think McLaren wants to de-escalate. But for all of his composure off track and many people calling him the Ice Boy, even though he's actually not leaned into it and I personally disagree, he's more of a Mika Hakkinen than a Kimi Räikkönen. What happened around Kota is that, despite the cool composure, he is not immune of ego-driven moves that are born from impulsive actions, which was the case of Lando Norris having a slow start. And with Piastri's track record around Austin being not quite as good as Lando's, this was opportunistic. It's the same kind of ego trip that haunts any driver who is seeking to win their first World Championship title. Or maybe the next World Championship title. It happens. But make no mistake, that moment of impatience cost him dearly, a very valuable perk which is no longer afforded to him and has given his rival in the championship, albeit his teammates, a nice little boost. Everything is now fair and square, and in a way which was not entirely obvious to the casual fan. And I can also imagine that Oscar is pretty gutted to have lost that perk, but if he is, he's very much keeping it to himself. Yeah, as he usually does, and as far as he's concerned, and ideally for the team, the matter is closed, at least publicly. Norris's pre-Austin language, though, was more personal and slightly combative. That opener stating that it has got nothing to do with you guys, he's very much telling the media that they are very much outsiders and that what he is sharing with them is valuable information that they should be grateful for. He's also saying that he too felt gutted for causing controversial talks within the team that circled around him. He was, like Oscar, trying to draw a line on the matter, saying that there had been a meeting, everything had been dealt with, but unfortunately, with Lando being a little bit too honest, which is something I do appreciate, the Formula One media circus really pounced on that, looking at the demeanour of him looking really defeated, like he'd lost something very valuable. It was something that did not track as cleanly as it was with Piastri. But nevertheless, it was something that was true to Lando himself. He was being the real deal, and as I will talk about in a moment, that could help him win the battle, at least amongst the fans. Because make no mistake, the last few races have very much lit a fire amongst McLaren fans, and has really got them going at each other's throats. As well as the team having to play damage control as to saying, yeah, no, really, our boys are equal, I swear, really, for realsies, no backsies. A little bit too hard, in my honest opinion. And what this also tells me right now is that McLaren very much rules the roost, that they are both being regulated by their bosses. When both drivers know they're expected to sound off the same things, any small deviation or tick becomes a red flag, and the world obsesses over it. I mean, what are we doing right now, folks? That in turn could then lead to paranoia, which is why it's very important for Oscar and Lando to be on the same page. Otherwise, it breeds poison biscuits, as Andrea Stella once said. And the irony in all of this is that trying to make sure that both drivers say the same thing leads to a completely different game coming into fruition. That it's a case of which driver can sound the most authentic. But for now, the language seems very, very close to one another, and it might lead to McLaren suddenly not getting as many headlines regarding papaya rules, or they fall out of the F1 lexicon entirely. But as I mentioned a few months ago, if McLaren become a little bit too jittery or a little bit too controlling, you can start to see the drivers exerting their influence in other ways. It can happen, and it may happen in who is the most real, man? Who's the one that everyone vibes with the most? Who passes the vibe check? I do feel like Lando is winning that particular battle, because Oscar, he is very much towing the corporate party line, but I do feel that he is holding things back. The closest thing I've seen to authentic, raw emotion at the moment was when he was doing that 60-second not saying a filler word challenge, and then he falls flat after 40 seconds, and he gives the most Australian "No!" I have ever seen. It was a very brief outlet of pure emotion. But it also really tells me that what McLaren have been doing is very similar to that little clip we got in Drive to Survive after Hungary, where the McLaren team is telling both drivers to act natural, okay? And when you add the fact that the Austin sprint incident happened and now it's removed Norris's prior penalties, the messaging is now probably seen by McLaren as gold dust. A real chance, an authentic one, to reset and forget. Follow the one rule and let the championship decide itself on pace and execution, right? Well, no, it still shows that they haven't let go of the narrative wheel just yet. Because Piastri's crash gave them a valuable public relations opportunity to really look genuine, that, hey, our boy Oscar messed up, so therefore it's only fair that Lando's punishment should be rescinded, because Oscar messed up, Lando messed up, they're now on the same playing field. Therefore, we can just go to papaya rules, and as long as they don't crash into each other, all is good. And it was something we saw on track. This was not said with words and words and words, it was pure action. Oscar done goofed, and therefore he paid the consequences. There were repercussions for him. But yes, of course, it may mean that both drivers will toe the line and be less likely to crash into each other. It is still very much the case of McLaren manipulating what goes on track in some shape or form. And it also shows that if they do end up forgetting and crashing into each other, the stick that might be looming over their heads might be bigger and whack down on them even harder. Yeah, that is a very big dissuader that is looming over them. And Max Verstappen does not have that. Because Laura Mekies has said that Max is at the heart of the project, and Yuki Tsunoda has said that he is all in ensuring that Max wins the 5th world title of his, as well as maybe Red Bull getting second in the Constructors. Which can happen, actually. It's only 10 points difference. But then at the same time, it does make you wonder that with Lando's repercussions that were meant to last for the rest of the season being removed just like that, who's to say that the same thing could happen in reverse, that suddenly we might get yet another penalty or repercussions? It's something that we'll be thinking in the back of our minds, unless things remain simple and there are no more dramas between them. But yes, I think Norris is quite relieved as to what's happened, because now he is free to race completely, there's nothing hanging over his head, and this has come at the right time when he is only 14 points behind Piastri, and Verstappen is not that far behind him. And this was a case of what Lando said that he does have over Oscar. The only thing that he thinks he has over Oscar is experience. That is something really important to remember, folks. Piastri has come on leaps and bounds this year, but this is still only his 3rd season of competition. At times like these, the Australian having far less races under his belt than the British driver, that can actually make the difference. Oscar isn't perfect, and I'm sure he'll be the first one to tell you that. Yeah, I am a fan of Piastri, but I am more than willing to hold my hands up and critique Oscar when it is due. Like how I will credit him where it's due. Same goes for everyone else. And right now, with the situation after Austin, everything looks really handy-dandy neat on paper. It keeps the garage completely and utterly stable, and for McLaren, that is the most important thing. And it might mean they might be willing to take a few hits public relations-wise, as long as things remain calm, it gets dull, there's not much point talking about it anymore, and therefore everyone forgets about it, and instead look to the Dutchman. And really, not having that thing over Lando is for the best, because that could have easily caused the garage to split into 2 camps. Then it might have led to both Oscar and Lando finding more discreet ways in terms of one-upmanship that look stable on the surface. We kind of saw that in 2007, with Alonso getting flustered at Hamilton, Hamilton sort of cheekily, youthfully playing dumb, saying, I don't know what's going on, man, I'm just learning my craft. Yeah, there were mind games from Lewis, let's just say that, and Fernando was falling for them every single time. His world at McLaren was being turned upside down, whereas Hamilton was reveling in the chaos. But even though a line has been drawn, I feel like this is not over. Yes, it's all been papered up, but it could easily completely come apart again if they do make contact. And now with only 5 weekends to go, with only 40 points splitting the top 3, there is very good cause for them to tangle with each other yet again. They both experienced the highs and lows of papaya rules. It could happen one more time before the end of the season, where one driver puts a tail out of line and McLaren immediately course corrects, or flip-flops, or U-turns, or what have you. or they can easily hold it in reserve should an opportunity arise. Monza's swapping of places due to an operational error? That's a course correction for what happened in Hungary when you stop to think about it, because both were related to pit stop maladies in some shape or form. Heck, Tom Stollard, Oscar's engineer, said, "Okay, Oscar, this is just like Hungary. It was something that McLaren held in their vest pocket and then did the vest pocket maneuver and went like, aha!" But this might have been a one-time thing and they can't play it again. Either that, or it might just turn into, okay, Oscar or Lando, this is just like Monza. You see what I'm trying to get at here? McLaren right now is very much alluding to the old phrase of, oh, what a tangled web we weaved. And it's only going to disintegrate if one of three things happen. First, that there really is no more contact between them until the end of the year. Only then will the story fade into the background. The team's papaya rules looking less likely to be a sticking point. People will hopefully, in the eyes of McLaren, stop thinking about papaya rules and then start to look at Oscar and Lando cleanly racing one another and thinking, oh, they really cleaned up that. Oh, that was really, really good. Oh, look at that. And Piastri was very much singing from the hymn sheet that was McLaren, following that edict of saying, oh, this is no big deal. Everything's good now. Let's just get on with it. And yeah, I think Zach Brown in the background was going, yeah, come on, yeah. And another way the web could disintegrate is simply down to the maths, well, the mathing. I mean, Andrea Stella said so himself, that the only way that team orders will be enacted is if the mathematics make it the logical thing to do. As in, it's looking very unlikely Lando is going to be contesting the championship, that most likely coming down if he gets a couple of DNFs and Oscar completely runs with it. It's usually the case in most team order situations towards the end of the year in a championship, and what the original playbook around Ferrari in the 2000s was meant to be. But unfortunately, as the late great Murray Walker once said, the boot was on the other Schumacher. And it makes sense considering that the Italian hailed from Ferrari before he moved over to McLaren. But the difference here this time is that Andrea has said many times he's witnessed the negative effects of team orders, especially what happened with Massa, because he was seeing this from Alonso's point of view, the one who was favoured, and he didn't like it. Thusly, it might explain what McLaren is doing right now, why they have explicitly and overtly resisted the idea of team orders until it mathematically makes sense. That could be Andrea's principles in actions, because, come on, yeah, Norris and Piastri are very much at the top of their game, but they are not a Michael Schumacher. They have not earned the right to be the de facto number one. Then, as I alluded to earlier, it might come down to a situation where the team has to do something because an external force is wielding their might down upon them. Zach Brown recently saying, oh yeah, that Max guy, oh, he's really relentless. Because if Max gets closer and closer to both McLaren drivers, internal politics goes down a rung on the ladder. See what I did there? In that situation, both Lando and Oscar could be rewarded for collaboration rather than going at each other's throats. Because that's what Max and Red Bull are banking on, for them to be divided for the fact they're both after their first world title, whereas with Max, he's already got that 4 times over. Piastri even acknowledges Max's consistency in the last few weekends and said there is no benefit in focusing on him. Him doing this is music to McLaren's ears. He's doing his part to reduce the noise around his Austin mistake and talking about Verstappen instead, whilst also showing a lot of respect toward the Dutchman. So yes, McLaren can easily take the pressure from Red Bull and Max and just go, look over there! And therefore the talk about papaya rules, so long as Lando and Oscar remain clean, is forgotten about. And it makes me realise that maybe McLaren will just take the hit in terms of public relations and the memes and the jokes for the next few days, if it means that papaya rules will no longer be talked about, and instead people will be talking about the title chase. Something that is more traditional, standard fare, conventional. Yeah, we've seen this before. It's something you see time and time again. That's exactly what McLaren want to be talking about. It's akin to maybe McLaren ripping the bandage off in one go and just accepting the sting that comes before it, but then the sting dies down and then you see, oh, everything's healed up already. Great. Because the phrase that Norris wielded after Singapore set a very clear expectation to the public. With Norris saying repercussions were had, it set the public ablaze, and it got everybody talking, and not in a good way. But once Piastri then said they reviewed Austin, that he had a degree of responsibility, it read like a walk back whether or not the internal logic made sense to them. So hey, McLaren got nobbled for both scenarios, Lando being too honest, Oscar being too corporate. No matter what McLaren did, it looked like a U-turn. Lando did a U-turn from being all standoffish to then being apologetic. Oscar got derided from being so judgmental over saying, well, if they have to hit a teammate to do that, then that's a pretty bad job. And then he did that himself in a way. He's then going to go like, oh, yeah, okay, you know, we had it, we always have it, no big deal, okay, let's move on, okay, you know, the show's over, folks. You know, both of them have had to play damage control in some shape or form, and they are going to have to take the hit in many ways, including McLaren. But right now, I think the best thing that they can do is just ride it out and then hope for the best. It's all for the sake of team harmony, and maybe that might be worth it if they're just going to have to take a few blows amongst the press, because having that team harmony would be better than there being some kind of imbalance, no matter how small it is, such as maybe Oscar having qualifying priority. Where does it stop? That imbalance would fester, and McLaren knows it can't afford yet another disturbance in the force, because after that clash, the balance was restored, and the team can now visibly avoid that, all claims of favouritism, because they punished Piastri in some way, as well as they punished Norris. Yes, we the public will chew over this for a while, but the team will look at their balance sheet and go, oh well, we can stomach a few days of ribbing. And Piastri's comments regarding Verstappen could ultimately help McLaren pivot the whole conversation. What this means, my friend, is that maybe we can take the cinnamon and cynicism and the cup of copium, put them all together, and then just put it to the side. We may not need them, at least for the time being. And I think the thing that Norris and Piastri are starting to realise is that, yes, they are the medium to long-term future of McLaren, but underneath the papaya shell that is rooted in racing heritage going all the way back to Bruce McLaren himself, there is a very obvious corporate shell just under the surface, a couple of coats down. The question might not be who's faster anymore, but more like who learns first that being the face of a multi-billion-dollar brand means knowing when to stop being yourself in public. And in that game, Oscar might be winning it, but at what cost? It really depends on what battle the drivers want to undertake. But the battle in you deciding as to which video to watch next is a very short one. You can go and watch this one right here. I'll see you around.